About 4 years ago, my wife Justine and I moved into the George Street home. We were aware that it was somewhat of a fixer-upper before we entered. What else are you going to obtain in this market? However, it was the first house we shared, our very first house. I would still have considered it a palace, even if it had been a total shithole. As soon as we moved in, we got to work on the repairs. We had a lot of work to perform, including replacing the windows, remodeling the kitchen and bathrooms, and replacing part of the flooring. At the time, I wasn't really concerned about the basement. It was more of a project that I thought I would work on when we had more funds and time. We actually only utilized the basement for storage at the time. We stored everything we didn't need year-round or any boxes we couldn't bring ourselves to unpack there. The gazebo canopy, patio furniture cushions, seasonal decorations, and other such items. Although I had originally intended to finish the basement and convert it into a recreation area with a little storage area off to the side, as life progressed, that simply became less and less important to me. After Justine became pregnant, I concentrated more on the kid and my actual 9/5 to ensure that we had enough money. Since the major renovations were finished, we slowed down. I set aside a small amount of money for the basement with every paycheck, but I didn't really see my nest egg growing until recently, when I discovered that I had exceeded my savings target by a few months. Given that I had the funds and that our son Darius was growing older, I reasoned that it was time to properly finish the basement. I therefore did just that. In order to create 2 distinct rooms in the basement, I constructed some additional walls. One served as a living room, another as an office, a third as a playroom for Darius, and the final one was used only for storage. After getting everything set up perfectly, I moved on to the flooring. When I learned about the sinkhole, I had started moving furniture down in the living room, which I had been moving away from. The ground collapsed when my friend Salim and I were in the middle of shifting the furniture. We had placed one couch in the middle of the space and looked away for only 2 seconds or so. By the time we turned around, the couch was sinking into the floor and rupturing the wood flooring I had put in. I recall that before realizing what was happening, Salim and I both froze and stared at it. After that, we kept our distance before rushing upstairs to phone the fire brigade and get my family out. We were fortunate. There wasn't much of a sinkhole. The rest of the home was still largely structurally solid, and it was perhaps just 4 or 5 feet broad at most. I'm still baffled as to how I could have missed it. There must have been a warning sign of some kind, right? Some indication of the instability of the concrete? For heaven's sake, what if it gave while I was standing on it? Or worse, when Darius or Justina were on it? We stayed at a motel for the following few days until it was decided that we could return to the house. I suppose it was only really affecting a tiny section beneath the basement level. Fortunately, the remainder of the foundation remained intact. I was informed that we should be all right as long as I took care of it right away. That was wonderful news to me. This was a nightmare for all homes, really. However, it was preferable to discovering that your home was so dysfunctional that it was unfit for habitation, isn't it? I got a contractor to fill it out for me. I trusted him to complete the job well and reasonably priced because he was a family friend. He had a rather full schedule through the end of July and the beginning of August. Although it wasn't ideal, I reasoned that until I had time to bring him in, I could live with the enormous hole in my basement. I warned my son not to play downstairs and covered it with a piece of plywood until my guy could get to it. Salim and his family came over for supper now, approximately a week after the sinkhole had appeared. We started talking while enjoying a barbecue in the backyard. I suppose his children had been requesting to see the sinkhole and thought they would be permitted entry. "You mean kids?" It goes without saying that neither of us would place his children in a sinkhole, but I suppose their inquiries had piqued his interest in what exactly was inside. He wanted to go inside and snap some photos to show his children, even though I warned him it was probably just dirt. I decided I might as well let him go after a bit. While we're at it, perhaps we should remove my couch. It was a decent couch after all. If I could avoid it, I truly didn't want to lose it. I went downstairs with Salim and we took off the plywood covering. It didn't appear that deep of a sinkhole, 6 to 8 feet perhaps. We thought we could make it work, but you wouldn't want to go down there without a route out. I sent Salim down first and retrieved a ladder from the garage to put in the hole. Since the couch wasn't particularly heavy, I reasoned that perhaps we could wrap some rope around it and use it to push and pull it back up between us. I threw the rope to Salim as he descended the ladder, but when I looked down, he was simply surveying the sinkhole with astonishment on his face. I had to come down and see it for myself, he insisted. The sofa could wait. I descended the ladder because I couldn't fathom what could be down there to catch Salim's attention in that way. He was correct. I had to witness it firsthand. I've already seen images of sinkholes on the internet. Typically, the walls are composed of mud rather than polished stone slabs. Furthermore, typical sinkholes are undoubtedly devoid of images. Salim was shining the light on the stone walls after pulling out his phone. Someone had sketched rudimentary pictures of humans. Nothing more than stick figures in some kind of faded paint or dye. They all appeared to be fleeing from something in the picture. A lone red-painted man. "That's some spooky-looking shit, right?" Salim remarked, before going on through the sinkhole, which took far longer than I had anticipated. I couldn't help but think it seemed more like a tunnel the longer I stared at it. I glanced back up toward the opening of the sinkhole. The ceiling was filled with smooth, chiseled stones, though some of them appeared to have fallen away close to the hole's margins. On the floor underneath my couch, I could see their shattered remains. Over time, they would most likely come free and fall, revealing my cellar floor. There was no sinkhole here. There was more to this. Salim kept his flashlight focused on the pictures that were painted on the walls made of stone. The majority showed the red man standing over victims, attacking them, and apparently tearing at them. To test whether I could find the end of the tunnel, I switched on my own flashlight and looked down. There was just blackness as far as I could see in one way. How far down it went was beyond my comprehension, but I noticed what appeared to be an ending in the opposite direction. Salim also witnessed it. We moved slowly down the tunnel, approaching the visible end more and more. As we got closer, I started to see that a stone door was what we were facing. It had most likely been crimson at one time, long ago, but except from a few spots, the paint had faded. Salim arrived first and used his phone to snap some pictures of it. He may have even taken some footage, I believe. I attempted to open the door while he was doing that. Even with Salim's assistance, we were unable to get it to move because it was too heavy for me to move alone. Simply put, it was too heavy. How anyone could have opened it is beyond me. Before we left, we snapped a few more photos. We followed the tunnel for a little while because Salim wanted to see what was on the other side. After only 6 or 7 minutes of walking, we came to a place where the tunnel had collapsed in on itself, and I persuaded him that staying there was probably not the wisest course of action. After climbing the ladder back into my basement, we put plywood over the hole once more. Upon returning upstairs, we couldn't stop discussing what we had witnessed. The entire event clearly delighted Salim's children. However, I must admit that it made me a little uncomfortable. The entire location had just looked so impractical. For example, we lived just outside of Toronto, Canada, and if you're not from here, you're probably not familiar with the region's reputation for ruins. As we discussed our options, I showed my wife a few of the photos we had shot that evening. When you discovered some strange archaeological trash in your cellar, neither of us knew exactly what to do. However, we understood we needed to make a call. Finally, we reached out to a man named Dr. Donald Richards from the University of Toronto via email. One of the anthropology programs there has him as a professor. We reasoned that he might be able to explain whatever the hell we were looking at, and Dr. Richards responded to our email the morning after we submitted it. "I appreciate you contacting me with this. You've definitely discovered something fascinating. I'm unable to tell right away who left these ruins behind or why based only on the pictures you sent. If it's feasible, I would adore the chance to examine this in more detail. Even though I have a full itinerary till this weekend, is there any chance I might visit this tunnel on Saturday or Sunday?" Before you have to close it up once more, I would adore the chance to record it. Regards, Idol. I assured him it will be all right on Saturday. For the most part, the rest of the week went by without incident. Of course, I told Salim what was happening. When Dr. Richards inspected the location, I assumed he would want to be present. I couldn't really blame Justine for wanting to end the entire situation quickly. We both had no desire to descend down the basement. I didn't really want to be alone with that sinkhole, but I suppose that was just my imagination playing tricks on me. I kept thinking that some of the stones in the ceiling might come off, leaving the basement floor with weak points where more holes could form if I stepped on them at the right moment. I know this seems ridiculous. To be honest, I wanted to spend as little time as possible in the basement, if only for my own protection, until that entire area underneath my house was occupied. I came upon this tale on an internet horror site. God, that was probably 10 years ago, if not longer. I've always remembered it. I have no idea why. The idea has been used countless times and the writing was not very good, but I still find myself thinking about it now, after all these years. Or, I'll remember when I see a photograph on the wall. The narrative proceeded as follows. A man takes up residence in a house. He gets it for a low price, and it's old and has a lot of history. He settles in, and everything is great. A couple weeks later, he finds a woman who wasn't previously there in one of the paintings on the walls. She is dressed in what appears to be vintage attire, perhaps Victorian, and the painting depicts a landscape. Most likely, Victorian. All these stories proceed like that. She has pale complexion, long black hair, and intense eyes. He feels a little uneasy as he looks at her. Her eyes are deeply rimmed, most likely Victorian. All these stories proceed like that. She has pale complexion, long black hair, and intense eyes. He feels a little uneasy as he looks at her. She appears in other paintings after he tries to dismiss it as the human brain's fallibility and believes he had simply missed her earlier. He then begins to notice her in the backdrop of family photos. The guy's hearing creaks and bumps in the night, feels like he's being watched, and notices strange things that he can't explain. It gets worse when she starts to appear in mirrors. One day he wakes up, goes downstairs, and discovers that every square inch of the walls is covered in drawings of the woman, each of which appears to be staring right at him. It was one of those tales that included an illustration. It was said that the woman was repeatedly drew on one of the walls. Even if the drawing wasn't particularly good, the image nevertheless had an unnerving quality. Not the best one out there, as I mentioned. The identity of the woman and the reason behind her harassing the hapless narrator are never revealed to us. Why she suddenly shows up on the walls is unknown to us. The climax is unsatisfactory, and there is no resolve. Nevertheless, I've looked for the article once more, but I've never been successful. The author may have removed it. I hope they didn't. I want to view that image once more. Mom requested me to assist her in sorting through some of Great-Grandma's belongings a few weeks ago. As a pack rat family with a keen interest in genealogy, we have preserved and documented nearly everything over the years, storing everything in our attics to remain unaltered. Since I'm the only child who has expressed interest in our lineage, I will receive the many artifacts of our family history that my mom inherited from her mother when she passes away. Therefore, it was in my best interest to assist her with organizing her great-grandmother's belongings and perhaps persuade her to discard some of the more damaged items if I could. Mom pointed out the people she knew, which was the most of them, as we spent part of the afternoon looking through her photo albums, which we brought downstairs. Then we arrived at this one image. It had simply been sandwiched between two arbitrary pages. It wasn't in a sleeve. It was an antique Polaroid of a woman wearing a long dress in black and white. Her mouth was curled into a small grimace as she looked at the camera without emotion. Her eyes were piercing, and she had gorgeous long hair. She folded her hands in front of her, and there was something familiar about her. When I asked my mother who she was unable to identify her. Nothing that could provide us with a clue was written on the reverse of the picture. It had been years, maybe even more than 10 years since my mother had last glanced at the album. Despite how out of place the photo was, she couldn't remember ever seeing it and couldn't fathom leaving it there. On a whim, I asked her if I may take it with me, and she said yes. I kept thinking about the odd feeling of familiarity. I didn't realize she resembled the woman in the story until I had made it all the way home and through my front door. It's clear that the woman in the narrative hadn't been shown in any nice photos, only sketches. In other words, she looked just like I had pictured her, even down to the way her hands are positioned and the curved wave in her hair. At that point, I recalled another element from the story that I had long forgotten. In the pictures on the walls, the woman was reaching out as though to grab the narrator, but in every other picture, her hands were clenched in front of her. I told my mother about the photo and the narrative over the phone. She is a rather realistic and cynical person, so I could tell she felt I was exaggerating things. She did consent to look through her great-grandmother's files and writings in an attempt to identify the woman. I chatted with her again at my brother Nathan's memorial service. Only a few days had passed since we discovered the photo. Nathan was discovered with a slit neck in his house 10 years ago. He was just 34. His death sparked an almost immediate police inquiry, but no one was ever been able to provide any proof. Our family has theories about who might have done it. Most likely, we won't. We hold a small family get-together to grieve and remember him every year on the anniversary of his passing. We were at my mother's house, recalling and going over old photos of my brother. Mom had already informed me that the image we had discovered days earlier had no information on it. It was roughly what I anticipated. When I saw this particular photo of my brother, I had already made the decision to put it aside and forget about it. It was taken at his housewarming party, a few months before to his passing. We were both making these goofy expressions at the camera while he stood with his arm around me. Even though I've seen that picture countless times, I hadn't truly seen the painting in the backdrop until today. The picture depicted a countryside with undulating hills and trees scattered throughout, and there was a man standing beside one of the trees. It appeared to be a human, but I had to squint to see it. A female. For the remainder of the memorial, I was preoccupied. When I got home, I took the photo and just sat there looking at it, wishing I could get a better view of the painting. Even though I was somewhat certain that the connections I was making were not real, it was difficult to resist doing so when I was thinking about that narrative and the photo my mother and I had discovered. I was obviously exaggerating the situation. I'm always a touch odd around the anniversary because Nathan's death was difficult for me. As a coping mechanism for the likelihood that my big brother's killer will never be held accountable for his actions, I was seeing things that weren't there. I chose to leave well enough alone and placed both of the photos in my bedside drawer. I might take another look at them when I felt more like myself, perhaps. After a few weeks, my anxiety gradually subsided. Seeing it all as a creation of my imagination got simpler. Anyway, I've always been the creative type. Yesterday, I entered the bathroom after getting up to get ready for work. I noticed another person standing in the mirror with me as I went by it. A woman's hands were folded primly in front of her, her eyes piercing and her hair dark and wavy. I spun around and discovered that I was by myself. I looked at the mirror again, but her image was gone. She was the one. It must have been her. Since then, she hasn't left my thoughts. Or that tail. Was there a tail? Did I get every detail correct? Perhaps she was the first to appear in the mirror. What precisely transpired next? Her picture was scribbled all over the walls at the end of the story, but what happened next? Was there ever an update written by the individual? I must locate the writer. I want to know if it was the person I believe it was, and if so, why he kept it from me. Is it in his journals somewhere? Please help me locate this story if you recall it. I need answers because something horrible is occurring to me right now and is about to happen again. Unfortunately, the only person who could provide them to me is no longer with us. 1992 was the year my life went apart. I lost my son at that time. He was 7 years old and went by James. Before that, my life wasn't great either. I cleaned the homes of wealthy people for almost nothing, but at least I had my son. I felt as wealthy as the individuals I cleaned for as long as I had him. I lost myself after losing James because he was such an important part of my life. It was a typical day when I lost him. It would be one of those days you would forget. The grocery shop was where we were. I forgot something, so I left my son in line to grab it from the cashier, and he was gone when I returned. The CCTV had supposedly been down for weeks, and no one had seen anything. What little the cops could do, they did. For a while, my son's face appeared on the local news, but nobody knew who he was. He was just gone. My will to live was the same. Out of grief and guilt, I wanted to end my own life, but I was so indifferent from my melancholy that I lacked the willpower to do it. Rather, my mind simply stopped working and I went into a self-destructive autopilot. I saw myself collapse and focused only on meeting my basic requirements, which included eating, drinking, and sleeping. One of the homeowners who heard my story before I lost my job offered to help me by finding me a job that would pay more for doing less work. I had no sense of value in myself. The offer was accepted by my autopilot, which could only exert the bare minimum of effort to exist. So I saw myself go down. I saw myself get ready, leave my small flat, and stand by the side of the road. My new boss used to say, "It's a big city and it's thirsty." I've been watching myself fall carelessly for 5 years. That night, at the end of 1997, there was a strangeness in the air that made me nervous. I felt like someone other than myself was watching me for the first time in a long time. I also didn't enjoy it. It didn't feel right. My hair stood on end. There was a cinema theater next to my corner. It was Starship Troopers. There were many individuals standing outside. When I worked, I normally avoided bigger groups, but this feeling of dread made me want to cross the street and ask someone for a light, simply to be close to someone. A black Cadillac DeVille with tinted windows approached me slowly before I decided what to do. An additional client, I pondered. Based on the car's appearance, it's a rich one. From the passenger seat, a tall man emerged. "He has a chauffeur," I casually remarked to myself. Very wealthy back then. I should raise my pricing. I believe he was in his 70s, definitely somewhere up there, but not the oldest one I'd dated. He wanted to give me a handshake. Among the courteous ones, I reasoned. Usually I could read them and determine if they were submissive or dominant, married and bored, lonely and desperate, happy and carefree, or miserable and caring. However, with this man, it's telling that I want to use that word now because I didn't generally think of them as actual men. He was a whole oxymoron, standing tall before me, courteous but threatening, fatherly but antagonistic, somehow familiar yet unfamiliar. When I explained to him what I had to give and how much it would cost, my voice faltered and my lifeless heart skipped a beat. "Yes," he said, "you must be freezing, poor girl." Did he wish to fall in love, even if only for a single night? I was still unable to tell. I was unable to identify his thick dialect. "I'd like something a little out of the ordinary," he added. A pervert? I wasn't shocked, but I wouldn't have guessed. "Now," I said, "I don't do weird shit." I simply didn't know how to behave in those kinds of extremely staged circumstances. Not that I cared all that much. I wasn't an actress. I was a whore. "Oh," he remarked, seeming dissatisfied. "Well, I'm afraid this is somewhat strange. However, I'm prepared to pay a high price." I looked him in the eye. Although he had a gentle face, a scar across his eye gave him a menacing appearance. After giving it some thought, I asked, "How much are we talking about?" "Enough that this is a profession you will never have to work in again." I chuckled. "Give me a number. Don't be evasive." $500,000, he remarked with a smile that was limited to his mouth. I nearly suffocated on my saliva. Really, I could live a life and retire with that type of money, perhaps even take action to assist others in my predicament. My thoughts blazed with possibilities I hadn't even dared to imagine. "Really?" he said. "If he didn't want me to do anything crazy, he wouldn't have given me so much money. Perhaps he intended for me to commit a crime, something involving dead people, animals, or children. No amount of money could force me to do such things, so I thought, fuck that shit. After a little pause, I said, well, what the hell are you asking me to do? With hope, he grinned once again. He added, I haven't accepted yet. Let's take a ride together and I'll try to explain. I can assure you immediately that I'm not engaging in any unhealthy behavior, such as pedo stuff or... The man chuckled. No, that isn't the case. That is awful. With a skeptical expression, I answered, you have my curiosity then. He held the automobile door open for me after opening it. Please, he said. I'll understand and let you go wherever you want if, after I've told you, you don't feel up to it. The man took the passenger seat beside me. I fastened my seatbelt. The motorist didn't even look back to say hello. Ahead, he was a shadowy figure against the traffic lights. The man cleared his throat and started talking as he slowly drove away from my small corner of the street. I can assure you that you won't have to do anything upsetting, but I can't tell you the specifics, not in the manner you recommended, however. You don't want to tell me or you can't tell me? I inquired. He asked, does it matter, with a confused expression as if he truly couldn't tell me. Well, tell me what you can. He gazed down at his knees as though he were getting ready to divulge a long-kept secret. It's not that difficult. I will provide you with a new outfit once we reach our location. I'll invite you to enter a building once you've put them on. Inside of it, I'll meet you, and then you'll know what to do, but I can't tell you what will happen. I can guarantee you that. A sense of unease that had been present before returned. Was I falling into a trap of some sort? However, why this strange charade? It was simple to kill me. Even I wouldn't fight. Perhaps he intended to keep me as a slave and torture me. The idea of that made me shrug. I was unable to make sense of any of this. You swear it's not against the law? Despite the fact that I had no reason to believe anything he stated, I inquired. And that I won't suffer any harm? He declared, it's nothing illegal. After half an hour, the vehicle came to a stop. The man opened the door and I couldn't tell if he was relieved or dejected. We're here, he declared. We entered the yard of a dilapidated, deserted school. Although I'd never been here before, I could tell by the background cityscape that it was south of the city and probably in a poor neighborhood. The streetlights lit the sky orange as heavy snowflakes fell from the sky. As I gazed at the deserted school building, I heard the man unlock the trunk of his vehicle. I was overcome with the same sort of melancholy that always overcame me when I saw anything involving children. It made me think of James. The man answered, these are the clothes. Are you prepared? Sir, I stumbled out. From my perspective, I found both the worst case and the best case scenarios to be equally enticing. In the car you can alter, my driver will go outdoors. I went back to the car after grabbing the clothing. The driver left the vehicle without being specifically instructed to do so. I didn't feel much safer as a result. As I browsed the clothing, I reasoned that he must want me to play dress-up games. It was a uniform of some sort, complete with a peaked cap and black leather boots. It was yellowish, and on the front of the helmet and on the chest was a big eagle spreading its wings. I was relieved that it had all been about some sort of fetish, as I'd put everything on. The fact that he'd paid me so much for some strange dominatrix roleplay made it obvious that the man was crazy. Other than that, the outfit fit me great. However, the yellow coat was a little too big. Wearing these absurd clothes made me feel a little ashamed as soon as I got out of the car. Once more, the driver rushed inside the vehicle. Amazing, the man uttered. Is it cozy? I remarked. At least it protects against the cold. Is it a Nazi uniform of some sort? You're considering the eagle? He asked. It isn't what you believe. The Farivar is that. Why? It is irrelevant, he stated. Now all you have to do is walk through the school's door. We'll cross paths together. You'll give me $500,000 after that? I inquired. Yes, but do you require more? Well, no, don't worry, I'll give you what you need. Do you want me to give you directions inside? Something along those lines, he replied. I started in the direction of the school. The man said, wait. Before entering, you should be aware of one thing. Yep, that's an address. I got a piece of paper from him. I examined it. St. Nicholas Street 45, 3rd floor, door to the left, it instructed. I couldn't understand how this would fit into his strange vision, but I suppose I was willing to comply for $500,000. Trust me, you'll figure out the rest on your own. The only person who can comprehend is you. I said, I'll see you inside then. I opened the school's front entrance and entered, still feeling like a uniformed idiot. Hurry. A burst of wind ripped the cap off my head as soon as the doors closed behind me. I heard an explosion in the distance as soon as I had put it back on after bending down to pick it up again. I was not followed inside by the man. I thought he was going to enter the building from somewhere else, so I tried to locate him by walking around the deserted school hallways. Outside, there was another explosion and wondered, fireworks at this hour? Hello? I shouted. Where in hell are you? I made the decision to attempt to play the part. Who has been a mischievous schoolboy? No answer. After 20 minutes or so, I started to believe I had been pranked, which made me feel really foolish. I made the decision to go back to the schoolyard and check on the man. The corridors reverberated with the sound of my boots' heels striking the floor. When I got to the doors, I came to a halt. I heard another explosion, considerably closer this time. After hearing some sort of ruckus outside, people started cheering after that. I stood for a while, listening. Suddenly, the door was opened by someone. It was a young man with a lower rank, who wore a uniform that resembled mine. Major, he said, giving me a salute. At last, he shared the man's peculiar dialect. Are you part of the East Coast reinforcement? I reluctantly went outside while he was speaking. Although there was no snow and it was no longer chilly, the sky was still as gloomy as it had been. What's happening? I said, not to the young man, but to myself. As we approached a group of soldiers who surrounded what appeared to be a convoy of military equipment, including a tank, he stated, "We lost our commander a few days ago. We've been fighting our way to our goal ever since our organization was dropped somewhat far behind checkpoint necessity 2 weeks ago. But since day one, everything has been a shambles, and now there are just 30 of us remaining. Fortunately, we were able to intercept the cargo and..." I stopped listening because it was simply too much to process. Even though I knew I was awake, it felt like I was dreaming. I felt lightheaded from the chaos. I glanced back at the school as I turned around. It didn't seem as it had previously. Now it appeared to be an almost ruined old ruin. Then I noticed the corpses. They were being stacked on the schoolyard by a soldier. Their uniforms were entirely blue.